question.
Yes.
Now it's coming this Shabbat.
Right.
Is it, I know Orthodox people do it, but I would like to know conservative do it. Do we do in the conservative here the half bread in the form of a key?
No.
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 Okay.
And not all Orthodox people do that either.
Okay.
That's what's known as a segula, and it's on the border between superstition and custom.
Okay.
So it's supposed to be almost like a good luck thing. And that's very, very new. And only certain communities used to do that as their local custom, but it's spread because everybody wants good luck. But the best way to have a segula, the best way to have your life be charmed, is to simply follow Torah. And if you think that you can live a bad life but make a challah in the shape of a key and that's going to make something better, you're going to be disappointed.
And they call that thing shliso something?
All sorts, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So no, we don't have that as our custom.
Okay, good.
I mean, we did have one lady who made a challah in the shape of Haman's face for Purim, so that way we could tear him apart, which was kind of fun. But that was just for fun. It's, the shape,
yeah.
The shape of the challah, doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter.
You can make round challahs, you can make long challahs, you can make narrow challahs, big challahs, small challahs, whatever challah you want to make for Shabbat or any day that you want to make bread is perfectly fine.
Okay. Good.
So there are certain customary, like you'll see the braided challah is the most common, but it doesn't even technically have to be braided. It could just be a big lump. After all, when we have matzah, that's our challah, and that's about as boring of bread as you can find.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone make a key-shaped matzah.
Oh, really?
No, I don't think I've seen that. You could. I mean, you could, but it's not likely. All right. So today's class is going to be keyed in to the calendar. So we're going to talk about modern holidays. Now, this might sound a little strange because how can there be a modern holiday? After all, the Torah was finished about 3,000 years ago, 2,500, 3,000-ish years ago. The rest of the Bible was finished shortly after that. The rabbis talked about a few things that we needed to also be aware of. But for most of the last 2,000 years, we have not made new holidays. But something happened in the middle of the 20th century, and that's called the State of Israel. So when we talk about modern holidays, what we're really talking about are holidays that have been established through the State of Israel, and they have then been adopted by the rest of the Jewish world. And that's what we're going to see. Because in the 20th century, and we'll cover this a bit more, but we talked about it some when we did our introduction to the State of Israel. There have been a lot of changes in the Jewish world, and the overall world as well, right? There was mass persecution in Europe. There was mass immigration to the United States and the area that was known as Palestine. There was upheaval in Jewish communal life. Remember, we talked about the Reform, the Orthodox, the conservative movement, and all the seculars and everything that happened. There was the mass murder of the Holocaust. And then there was the miraculous rebirth of Israel as a state, as a political state. So all of that has made a lot of change. And Israel, the state, remembers that, and it celebrates those things that are joyous and remembers those things that are sad. So the State of Israel, because it is now an actual government with an actual legislature and laws and things like that, they have the ability to establish days for themselves. The same way as in America, we have the 4th of July, and we have Memorial Day, and we have Veterans Day, and we could have Flag Day and Armed Services Day, and we have all sorts of other days that are or President's Day or Martin Luther King Day. Because we have a government, the government can establish holidays for the nation. What's unusual is that when Israel establishes holidays for itself, many of them also get celebrated or commemorated in the rest of the Jewish world too. So this has been a very unique period in Jewish history where we have new holidays being established that are being celebrated by Jews around the world. And that's all because we now have an actual state of Israel. Make sense?
Yes.
All right, so the 3 days that have had the biggest impact are Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom HaZikaron, and Yom HaShoah. Now we're going to go through these. I thought I reorganized those. Just a second. Just one moment, because I was working with two different files, And that one was not the right one because that one does not have my edits. That was from last year and I edited and added material. And I want to make sure I put the most up-to-date one. That so far everything is right, but I knew that I had edited that to put them in chronological order of the calendar, not just of what their focus was. So you're going to update? Come on.
But today was Yom HaShoah.
Exactly. Yom HaShoah is the first of the three. And in last year's I talked about it third, but I wanted to talk about it first today. And that's one reason why I edited it, because today is Yom HaShoah. I'm just checking my phone version of this to see whether it has the updated version. Today is Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah is the day when we remember the Holocaust.
The Holocaust, yes.
Shoah is the Hebrew word for Holocaust. Okay.
In Israel, they sound this siren, and people, the whole state of Israel stopped. Everybody stayed in silence. They stopped. Literally, people stopped. The cars get out of the cars and stop, just in memory of the Holocaust. Yeah, it's really impressive.
Yes, it is.
I have seen videos, and I'm like, wow, amazing.
There we go. Okay, that's the right one. Now, why are you not giving me the right one?
If you check on Instagram, you can check some. I have like Israel Project, Israel Lafayette. They show videos and how in Tel Aviv, the most busy expressway, when they hear that siren, they stop. The car stop. People.
The freeways pull right over.
Yes, people pull right over.
Okay, that looks
and
like
they're
it's
really
the right one.
slowly stop for a minute or two until that siren stops. Then when the siren stops, then people keep.
Okay, now we're back in business. There we go. See, Yom HaShoah listed first. Okay, so Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut. Yom Yerushalayim is also an important day, but it has had a much smaller impact. We'll talk about that as well, though. So Yom HaShoah is the day that commemorates the Holocaust. Yom HaZikaron is the equivalent of Israel's Memorial Day, meaning it is a day for remembering the soldiers and victims of terror. And Yom HaAtzmaut is the day of Israel's Independence Day, like the 4th of July in America, Yom HaAtzmaut for Israel. Yom Yerushalayim, as we'll see, is the day when we celebrate Jerusalem, the city, and its reunification. But we're going to go through each of these in detail. Okay, so Yom HaShoah takes place on the 27th day of Nisan, which is today. Today is Yom HaShoah. Of course, that all Jewish holidays begin the evening before and continue through the daytime, ending with tonight, 3 stars coming out. So Yom HaShoah is the day when we commemorate the Holocaust. Now, the official name of Yom HaShoah, the name that's actually in the law books in Israel, is Yom HaZikaron LaShoah V'Lagvura, which literally means the day of remembrance for the Holocaust and heroism. Now, most of the time people just shorten that to be the day for the Holocaust. But Israel was very, very clear that when they wanted to make the day, they wanted it to be on a day when Jews fought. Because how do you decide for something like the Holocaust, which day do you pick for commemorating the Holocaust? Do you pick the beginning of the Holocaust? Do you pick which beginning? Kristallnacht, the Nuremberg laws? Which part of when Hitler was elected? How do you pick a beginning? Do you pick the end of the Holocaust as the day to remember, the day the last people died? Well, people died for years afterwards from starvation and disease that didn't die literally in the camps, but still died from the Holocaust. How do you pick a day? So the government in 1953 in Israel decided they would pick the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was the single largest attempt by a Jewish group to fight back against the Nazis. They unfortunately lost because, if France and Poland and Russia and everyone else loses to the Germans, of course, a small group of Jews who are just, with a few rifles are going to lose. But they fought very bravely. Now, that actually happened on the 14th of Nisan, which is the day before Pesach. You can't really have the commemoration day be on the day before Pesach because that's supposed to be a celebration time. So how do you fill that with sadness? So instead, what they decided to do was to move it to 8 days before Yom HaAtzmaut, the Independence Day, which is shortly after Pesach. So that's how you end up with Yom HaShoah being between Passover and Israel's Independence Day. But it was designed to remind us of those who fought back against the Germans, not only those who were killed in the camps and other means of extermination. Is that clear? I know it's a little, it's hard to pick, how do you pick a day to commemorate? So at 10 o'clock in the morning on Yom HaShoah, there are sirens that will wail throughout the entire country, just going, and everything for 2 minutes stops. Right? As you mentioned, even if you're driving down the freeway, people hear the sirens on the radio, on the outside their car or on their phone things now, and you pull over to the side of the road or stop where you are because everyone else is stopping, and you get out of your car. And you just see people standing along the roads or in the shops or in the sidewalks, supermarkets, yes. Wherever you are, everything freezes for 2 minutes of remembrance. Throughout that day, right, places of entertainment are legally closed. Right? You can't go see a movie on Yom HaShoah. You're not going to go to a rock concert on Yom HaShoah. They're simply not open. The TV stations only carry coverage of the commemoration ceremonies that are done by the government or local areas, and documentaries that are about the story of the Shoah and the communities that were destroyed. And the radio stations play somber, serious types of music. They're not playing, the latest Taylor Swift album. So the whole day has a very significant atmosphere to it. Now, there is some controversy over the day that was chosen for Yom HaShoah. In 1949, in fact, right after the Holocaust and right as the state began, the chief rabbi had said that the 10th of Tevet should be the day for remembrance for the Shoah. Now, the 10th of Tevet was already a fast day, and it was in commemoration of the siege of Jerusalem, and it wasn't during the month of Nisan. Now, the month of Nisan, the month of Pesach, is considered to be a joyous month. So putting a sad day in a joyous month, he felt wasn't the right combination. So he argued that it should be the 10th of Tevet. Other rabbis said it doesn't even need to be that. It should be on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, because that's already the day when we remember the worst tragedies of Jewish history, the destruction of the first and the second temples, the expulsion from Spain, the massacre, of the Crusades. So many catastrophes happened on the 9th of Av. Remembering the Holocaust would be one more, and that would be, a good day to remember. We're already sad, we're already mourning, we're already have a ceremony for what we do. But most people who were in Israel and around the world felt that the Shoah, the Holocaust, needed a separate day, that it needed its own day of commemoration, that it couldn't be folded in to days that we already were commemorating with sadness, that it had to stand out as a unique day. And they also really wanted it to be connected, at least close, to moments of heroism and bravery, not just one more day when Jewish people were being killed. They really wanted that small positive element of fighting back. The door should be open. So, yeah.
Yeah, he's open, yeah.
Yeah, because we have the security guard for the board meeting, so he's got the door. Oh. Hello? There we go. Now, how do we actually commemorate Yom HaShoah? Well, the conservative movement has included a special prayer in the Amidah, in our daily prayer, and it has also created what we call the Yom HaShoah scroll for use. Now, there are many important commemorative and educational events that take place on or near this day. So last night, for example, the Holocaust Center of Central Florida, which is located down near the JCC in Maitland. They had a special event. This year it was held at the CRJ, the Congregation of Reformed Judaism. And they had poetry that had been written about the Holocaust that was performed by some teenagers. They had a beautiful keynote speaker. They had a lot of very important commemorative elements. And that was for a lot of people to come and to commemorate in that event. Hello. Don't be shy. So that was what happened last night. But they have also been doing a listing of names. They have had programs where we can hear from survivors, people who lived through the Holocaust. And those happen throughout this collection of days in order to have more time to remember. So there isn't a huge amount that we do officially in our Jewish prayers or Jewish ceremonies, but the communities usually do a lot to try and remember the Holocaust on this day or around this time of year.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is the fun one to say. Yom Ha'atzmaut. Or you can just say the Independence Day, is on the 5th of Iyar, which is next week. And the 5th of Iyar, when Israel was first made a new state, was May 14th, 1948. Now, you may notice Israel is not doing May 14th as its day of celebration. It is using the Hebrew calendar as its day of celebration. And this is a very important but subtle choice, because the idea here is that although this is a secular event, it is officially a secular state, it is, was given its authority to be a state by the secular United Nations, nevertheless, we consider it part of Jewish history. And Jewish history is measured by the Jewish calendar. And so we remember the Independence Day on the 5th of Iyar, which means it will move every year. Some years it will be earlier, some years it will be later by the secular calendar. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so in 1947, November 29th, the UN voted to have the establishment of the Jewish and Palestinian states in the British Mandate of Palestine. The British agreed, although they saw there'd be trouble, and they said they would hand over control at midnight on May 14th. The Jewish groups agreed and declared independence for that day. The Arab nations, including the people who were in the territory that would be the Palestinian state, did not agree, nor did the surrounding states, and they declared war on May 15th. So that was how Israel celebrated its first day of independence, similar to America, which was also in the middle of a war when it declared its independence on July 4th. So unfortunately, the first day of Israel's independence was also the beginning of its fight for existence, or existence as a state. Now, how is it commemorated and celebrated? Well, many special events are held on that day. There is what's called the Israel Prize, and this is a prize that is given to people who are singled out because they have made great contributions to Israeli life and culture. There is an international Bible contest for high school students where it's basically like the ultimate trivia challenge for knowing the Tanakh. The IDF will do showcases of their army and their weapons and airplanes, and they'll often do tours of their bases. And of course, the most important thing, many Israelis use the day for picnics and outings because, you know, it's a little bit like July 4th here. It's not just, yay, America. It's also, yay, let's go have a great time and celebrate our freedom. And so this is a big part of the celebration for many of the people in Israel. Now, the question of how do we celebrate it Jewishly as opposed to politically is very controversial. The conservative movement in Israel and abroad, we celebrate it with what is known as Al Hanisim, which you may have noticed is a special paragraph that is added in our Siddur during the Amidah. There are versions that we add for Hanukkah and for Purim, and the conservative movement added a version that we say for Yom Ha'atzmaut. And we also recite Hallel, the collection of psalms that we said during Passover or other major holidays. We also have special Torah readings, Deuteronomy 7, as well as reading for the Haftarah from Isaiah. Now, none of these are obligatory, right? They're not like you have to do this or you're breaking a commandment. But this is how we are trying to express our joy at the establishment of Israel through a religious lens, not only by picnics and not only by awards and ceremonies, but also through how we say our prayers and how we read through the lens of Torah and the lens of Tanakh, the miracle of the new state of Israel. But there are some people who disagree that there shouldn't be this, that this new state is purely a secular creation, and therefore to include religious celebrations they feel is inappropriate. There are people who are both on the left side who say that and people on the right side who say that. But we're conservative, we're in the middle. So we still believe that there is a taste of redemption here, that although clearly the world is not redeemed yet, it's not as though we're done, the establishment of the state of Israel is a very, very important step for that beginning of the blossoming. We say Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the beginning of the blossoming of redemption. It's like the first little plant sticking up through the ground. And if you don't have that, then you definitely don't have redemption. But if you've got that, redemption may be soon. Now, it may take 100 years for that to grow. It may take another 1,000 years to grow. I don't know. But at least it's growing. And that is something we believe should be celebrated as a religious celebration, not only as a political one. Make sense? Maybe? Okay. Now, Yom HaZikaron is our third day. Technically, Yom HaZikaron is before, is before Yom HaAtzmaut. As you can see, it's on the 4th of Iyar. Now, the full name of Yom HaZikaron, which I always forget because it's very technical, is Yom HaZikaron L'Chayalei Ma'acharot Yisrael V'Lanifka'ei Fulot Eva, which literally means the day of remembrance for Israeli fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism. It's a very, very long day, but it's easier to remember Remembrance Day, in the same way that England talks about Remembrance Day, and we talk about Memorial Day, meaning the day when we remember soldiers or other victims of war that have perished during the struggle to keep Israel a free and strong nation. And originally, this day was on Yom HaAtzmaut. That is to say, on the same day, the 5th of Iyar, that they were celebrating the independence, they were also doing ceremonies to remember the fallen. That was hard because unlike America, where only nowadays a small portion of American families have had loved ones fall in war, in Israel, every family has buried at least one member of their family, whether it be a father, a son, a brother, an uncle, a cousin. Everybody has buried somebody in one of the wars. There is no family that is not touched by the wars to keep Israel free and safe. So that means basically everybody is mourning. I know for most of us, Memorial Day in America, I hope we remember the sacrifice that has been made, but most of us don't have a close connection to somebody who has been buried while fighting for our nation, at least not this generation. In Israel, they all have. So imagine trying to celebrate being free and crying because you are visiting the grave of a loved one. Those emotions are very hard to have at the same time. And so in 1951, they officially made, or 1951 they began, and then in 63 they made it official. They said that it would be the day before Yom HaAtzmaut. This would be the equivalent of putting Memorial Day on July 3rd, and then Independence Day on July 4th. And it makes the connection more obvious, right? That Israel has been kept free at a very, very high price. Although the numbers are not huge of the soldiers that have fallen as a percentage of the population, because Israel is a small country, so many thousands have perished that it'd be the equivalent of millions of Americans dying in war. And Israel wanted to make sure that when people celebrated being free, they remembered what it cost to keep that freedom. Make sense? Yes. Okay. Again, there are sirens for silence. At 8 p.m., which is sort of the official beginning, there is a 1-minute siren to let people know that the time has begun. And then the next morning at 11 a.m., there is a 2-minute siren where, again, people stop and the whole country comes to a standstill. At the end of the day, which is the beginning of Yom HaAtzmaut, remember, because the end of the day is in the evening and the new day begins in the night. At the end of the day, they have they raise a black flag to the full mast, and then they begin the Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day celebrations. So it makes a very clear transition from one day to the next. Make sense? Okay. Yom Yerushalayim, the 28th day of Iyar, which, as you can see, is another like 20 days later. So we've had the Yom HaShoah today. We've got Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron coming up next week. And then we have Yom Yerushalayim coming up like 3 weeks later. 3 weeks later. Oh, I should point out, Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron are celebrated by the Jewish community here in Orlando. So if you're not already on the Federation mailing list and the JCC mailing lists, get on those lists.
They have the Remembrance Day on May 7th,
Exactly.
and then the Independence Day on May 9th.
Exactly. Right. So they do the Remembrance Day in the evening, and then they do the Independence Day in the afternoon. So that means it looks like there's a day in between, but because of the way Jewish holidays work, it's actually the next day Jewishly. So the ceremony for Yom HaZikaron is always very moving, as we remember the people who have perished, and the get together and celebration for Israel's Independence Day is a lot of fun. So if you're able to attend, please go. It's they're really very special times. And of course, each year you have to check, when is it being held, where is it being held, what time is it being held, because it changes a little bit each year because of the Jewish calendar. Good so far? Okay. Yom Yerushalayim. This is probably the more complicated one, right? Because in America, we don't have a Washington, D.C. day. Right? We got Washington's birthday, which we now call President's Day, but we don't have a day for a particular city in America. But Jerusalem is special. But to understand Yom Yerushalayim, we need to do a little bit of history. Right? So again, as we talked about 1948, the UN partitioned the British-controlled territory that would become Israel. As we said, part was given to the Jewish majority and part was given to a Muslim majority. Jerusalem was planned to be an international city, which neither new country would control. Right? So there was going to be parts that were Jewish, parts that were not Jewish, and then Jerusalem in the middle was going to be a special international city that the United Nations would be overall in charge of. Great plan, right? Yeah, but as we saw, didn't work out so well, right? Israel had independence, but there was war that immediately followed. So Israel became an independent state, and the areas that were supposed to be the Arab state were taken by Jordan and were taken by Egypt. But what happened to Jerusalem? Well, Jerusalem ended up being divided into what is called the New City and the Old City. We got a map. Okay, let's see if I can move a little cable here so I can point. So in 1948, when the war stopped, this was the border. So you had Israel here, and you had Jordan all here, right? Completely surrounding. It was like, if you can see, I don't know if there, it's like a little finger of Israel pushing in towards Jerusalem. And then you had a lump of Jordan that went around either side. And then Egypt had this piece. And that was because the fighters who were working to try and help Israel in the first war knew very much that there was a big Jewish population in the western part of Jerusalem and a large Jewish population that was in what was called the Old City. Whenever you look at pictures of Jerusalem, you're looking at pictures of this, of the Old City with the walls outside and the Golden Dome and all of that. That's this area right here. And that city was divided inside the walls into 4 different sections. One of those sections was a Jewish section and had been a Jewish section for hundreds and hundreds of years. When the war happened, rather than letting this stay international, Jordan attacked, and that means Israel also fought. And as you can see, the fighting finished right along the edge of the walls of the Old City. And if you go there to this day, you can still see in the buildings on the Israeli side, bullet holes from the fighting at that time and from the fighting for the next 19 years, where the Jordanian soldiers would shoot from the walls of the Old City into the new city, the western side of Jerusalem. And it was a rather hard thing. So from 1948 to 67, the Jordanians controlled this, right? They annexed Jerusalem. They took it from the world. They said it's ours. And no one complained, except Israel. And they destroyed much of the Jewish quarter. They literally bulldozed buildings that had been there for hundreds of years and desecrated much of the synagogues and other things that were there. And they also said Israelis cannot visit. Right? So from 48 to 67, Jews were not allowed to go to the Western Wall. Jews were not allowed to go to the Old City of Jerusalem at all. They couldn't go anywhere on this side. There was a little Mount Scopus outpost that had remained unconquered by the Jordanians. And twice a week, they were allowed to send supplies back and forth as part of the ceasefire, but that was it. So this was the situation from 1948 to 67 for those 19 years. We clear on that? Okay. 1967, there was what was called the Six-Day War, which we talked about a little bit when we did our Israel section earlier. But the Six-Day War was a war that lasted 6 days. It's named that for a reason. And in the Six-Day War, Israel captured East Jerusalem. They captured that whole section, including the Old City from Jordan. And that was the first time that the city had been unified in 19 years. It was also the first time in 2,000 years that it was under free and independent Jewish rule. So that's why the day that this happened is kind of special for us. Right? It's for the last 2,000 years, we had dreamed of Jerusalem, and we'd had people living in Jerusalem, but it wasn't our city. We were always there just because someone else let us be there, except for the 19 years when they didn't let us be there. So when we finally got Jerusalem back, it was kind of a big deal.
And that was the capital, right?
Well, now Jerusalem is indeed the capital, exactly. So when the Six-Day War happened, Israel took the Golan Heights up here that are now on the edge of Syria. They took the entire West Bank up to the Jordan River, the Gaza Strip, and the whole Sinai Peninsula. Now, they gave back the Sinai Peninsula when they made peace with Egypt in 1979, and that was part of the deal. Egypt did not want Gaza back, unfortunately, but Israel has given Gaza to the Palestinians, and unfortunately, there have been all sorts of issues with that. The West Bank still remains under Israeli control, although many parts of it are under Palestinian Authority control, and the Golan Heights are controlled by Israel. And with the current issues with Syria, it looks like it's going to stay with Israel for the foreseeable future. And there was a big moment where the United States recognized Israel's annexation of that territory, but no other country has, so we'll have to see what the future brings. The dotted line here is now the official border of the city of Jerusalem. So that's when Israel talks about Jerusalem now, that is officially the border of the city of Jerusalem.
Okay.
So as you can see, it is unified. Good? Okay. So, Yom Yerushalayim, the 28th of Iyar, well, after its capture in 1967, the government established that there would be an annual day of celebration on the anniversary of that day each and every year. Excuse me. As I say, sneeze on. So the government will schedule cultural and political events for that day. And often, which I think is a beautiful quote, there will be a quote that's read. This is by Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan was the general who led the Six-Day War strategy and who was one of the first people to go into the retaken Old City. And when this happened, he said, "This morning, the Israel Defense Forces liberated Jerusalem. We have united Jerusalem, the divided capital of Israel. We have returned to the holiest of our holy places, never to part from it again. To our Arab neighbors, we extend also at this hour, and with added emphasis at this hour, our hand in peace. And to our Christian and Muslim fellow citizens, we solemnly promise full religious freedom and rights. We did not come to Jerusalem for the sake of other people's holy places, and not to interfere with the adherents of other faiths, but in order to safeguard its entirety, and to live there together with others in unity." That has been the Jewish position. So when Israel took back Jerusalem and unified it, we didn't destroy any Muslim holy place. We didn't hurt any Christian places. We didn't occupy or take over any of the mosques or any of the churches or any of the other holy sites. We let them continue to be in charge of their places, and we rebuilt the Jewish quarter, of course, but there was no attempt to stop them from worshiping and practicing their faith as they had. The idea was simply that Jerusalem should be whole and should be open. And indeed, Jerusalem now is a very open city, and people come to visit there from all over the world, including from the Muslim nations as well. Make sense? Okay. So what about now? Because that was 1967. That was a while ago. Well, the day is still officially celebrated, but it doesn't quite have the same spark that it used to. right? And this was summed up, I think, very well by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who's a wonderful scholar. He said, at its inception, Jerusalem Day was a glorious day. This feeling was to a great extent bound up with the Six-Day War and its outcome, which for a while produced an exalted feeling of release from dread and anxiety to liberation, well-being, and greatness. Over the years, however, the aura of that day has dimmed. So what he's trying to say is that when the Six-Day War happened in 1967, the Jews of Israel, and really the Jews around the world, were absolutely ecstatic. I mean, the feeling of joy and of strength of being able to defend ourselves, especially after the horrible tragedy of the Holocaust, the idea that Jewish soldiers would be able to retake our capital for the first time in 2,000 years, this was an amazing feeling. But after a while, you just kind of get used to it. Right? After a while, you take it for granted. And Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, as the united city of Israel, as part of Israel, people just accept that that's what it is. All right, we take it for granted that there's a Washington, D.C. They take it for granted that there's a Jerusalem. And the feeling of miracle of that 1967 battle that took Jerusalem back for us, not everybody feels that so strongly. And so the celebrations are not as big as they used to be. But it's still officially there, and it's still something that I think we should be very grateful for. Which means, how do we celebrate it? In halakha, in Jewish law, what do? Well, some Orthodox Zionists, some Reform, and some conservative groups recite Hallel. Remember, again, Hallel is the collection of psalms that we recite on the days of miraculous deliverance for our people. So we recite it, for example, on Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuot, most famously. And this was promoted by the chief rabbi of Israel. But many groups do not celebrate the day with any liturgical changes or additions at all. They don't believe necessarily that this was a God-given miracle. They're happy that Jerusalem is part of Israel, but it takes a certain, trying to think of the right word, but I don't want to sound negative, because it takes a certain perspective, a certain point of view to say this event was miraculous and that event wasn't. Because every day we could be saying Hallel because we still exist, we're still here, it's wonderful. But our tradition tells us we don't do that, right? We say the blessings that we've been asked to say. We don't continue to add on and on and on, or else, we'd never shut up. We'd have to constantly be praying. And we don't do that. We say what we're supposed to say. And so there are many communities that hesitate to add additional things for special days, even if they feel so special to us. And that's a really interesting balance, a really interesting tension that has existed now since Israel became a state, of how much do the state activities, the state victories, the state sadnesses, how much do those become Jewish activities? How much do those become religious obligations? Or are they just part of our culture? And that tension continues right to this day. And that's why you'll find in some synagogues of all types, they'll make a big deal of it. And in other synagogues, they won't make such a big deal of it. Everybody loves Israel, right? There really are very, very few Jewish groups that are anti-Israel. Unfortunately, there are some, but they're like, 0.00001%. They always get on the news, but they don't really count. But the question of how we celebrate, is it just cultural or is it also religious? This is still open for debate. And I think we won't come to a whole group consensus, probably not for another 100 years or so, because sometimes it takes us a while to figure out what this really, really means. Personally, I like to err on the side of celebration. I think, this seems like a precondition for the world to continue to move towards redemption. So if we're getting closer, let's acknowledge that we're getting closer, and let's go ahead and say Hallel. Let's go ahead and say that this is a special moment. But if someone said, I'm not sure yet, and I don't want to misuse a blessing prematurely, I understand that as well, and no criticism of someone who wants to still wait and see a little bit longer. It doesn't mean they don't love Israel. It doesn't mean that they're anti-Israel. It just means that they are reluctant to add a new obligation until we're sure that the obligation is what we're supposed to be doing. And that's not a bad attitude. Questions on that?
So that's like expecting when the Mashiach comes, and then they will do the changes if they decide.
Oh, exactly.
That's what they're expecting.
So when Mashiach comes,
everybody's
we're all going to
expecting
get we're all going to get a big update.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like if you've ever been away from like Wi-Fi for like a week. I know, incredible, right? Imagine when I was in Japan, for example. Most of the time I didn't have my phone on, and then after a couple of days I'd check emails, and it's like 500 updates. When Mashiach comes, that's what it's going to be like, right? We will have been doing the best we can without additional information, and that is good. We're supposed to debate and discuss and try to figure out what we should and shouldn't do, and we've been doing, I think, a very good job for a very long time. When Mashiach comes, yes, then we will be given those updates, and we'll see what needs to be fixed and adjusted. But I don't think we're very far off the mark, and most of the changes that might happen were going to be slight changes for how we practice Judaism. The biggest change for Mashiach, and we'll talk about this another time, is going to be the changes in the hearts of people around the world. Because most of us know basically what we're supposed to be doing, we just don't do it enough, and that's the part that needs to change the most. So it's the information a little and the spirit a lot more. Okay, so any question on these 4 days that are modern holidays? Because you're going to get a lot of yoms this time of year.
Yes.
Right? Yom HaShoah for the Holocaust, Yom HaZikaron for the Memorial Day, Yom HaAtzmaut for Independence Day, and Yom Yerushalayim for Jerusalem Day. So Yom.
Yeah, that's right.
Remember, Yom just means day. So it's just like in English, right? Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Flag Day. It's the same, except the day comes at the end rather than at the beginning. It's grammar. Okay, well, that's all the material I have for today. Do you have any other questions? Because we finished with a bit of extra time. I must have talked fast.
Well, I just have a question because remember I had a lot of questions last week when you were leaving.
Yes.
And I was like, you know what, I have to ask him this. I know people that for Pesach, they have a different kitchen.
Yes.
Okay, they have the regular kitchen inside of the house, and they do like a little porch in the backyard, and they have a kitchen there.
Yep.
Can I do that too? Can I have?
Can you?
Yes. Okay.
Should you and do you have to? No.
Okay.
So can, of course, right? I mean, if you like camping out and cooking on your patio, by all means, you use your patio as your cook. But there's no need for that, right? Every kitchen can be made kosher for Passover, because it doesn't take much to make your stove and your oven kosher for Passover. It doesn't take much to make your sink kosher for Passover. And whatever pots and pans you're using on your outdoor patio kitchen, you can use on the indoor patio kitchen, right? So, for example, in my house, we kosher our kitchen. And we have a couple tubs that we have our plates and knives that are just for Passover. And we have a few pans that are just for Passover. And the other pans that we need, we kosher, right? We talked about how you can make a pan kosher depending upon its construction. And the ones we have are very easy with boiling water to re-kosher and make them ready for Passover. Doing that, in my opinion, is a better symbol of our devotion to following God's commandments than simply saying, it's too hard, I'm going to live off my patio, right? Saying that is like saying that God has asked too much of us, right? Or saying that what God has asked of us is unreasonable, and so I'm just going to do something else instead. And I'm not a fan of that attitude, because I think everything that God has asked us to do is very reasonable, right? God did not ask us to fly to the moon. God didn't ask us to drink the ocean. God has asked us to do things that are all really quite easy for most people if they're willing to put a little extra time and effort into it. And if we ignore that and just jump to another solution, that's giving the impression that we didn't appreciate God's instruction. It'd be like if your parents said, I want you to clean up your room, and you said, fine, I'll go live in a hotel. No, all I asked was for you to clean up your clean up your room, right? Going to the hotel makes it sound like I asked you to do something unreasonable that you didn't want to do, right? And your room is still not clean. So just tidy up the room. Now, there are some families that do use Passover as a vacation time, and they will just lock up their house and will go to a hotel that's kosher for Passover, and that's fine. If that's a way to spend time with your family and have a joyous holiday, I understand that. But it's not Sukkot. There's no reason to be kicked out of your house in order to celebrate Passover.
Well, I have a little issue in my house. My mom, she's Presbyterian.
Ah, yes. Roommates.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we live in the same house, and she does not believe in anything, I believe.
Of course,
Okay,
right.
so she respected, but sometimes I don't think she understands.
Of course not, right.
And,
It's just
and
not
I don't
her.
want to go into details to explain her too much because she won't get it anyway.
Right.
But that's what I was thinking.
Different situation,
Uh-huh.
different situation. So
Different
so
situation,
indeed,
yes.
I've had students who are in college who are either converting or who are already Jewish, and they have roommates. And yes, the topic of how do you keep, well, not just Passover, but just keep kosher when you have a roommate or a relative that isn't Jewish and doesn't understand. It's not that they're disrespectful. It's not that they're trying to cause trouble. It's just they don't understand. And that does get very, very complicated.
Yes, it is.
And usually it does involve having a separate set of dishes or pans and pots. The oven and stove, however, usually there are ways to work around that so that you don't need to always be using different facilities. But I can talk if you want. You can give me some information about how your kitchen is laid out, and maybe I can give you a few specific pointers.
It's at least
Just
what I have
send me an
done.
email about the.
Oh, okay.
This is what my kitchen's like.
Because the thing is, it's a small kitchen, but at least
Mhm.
where I put all my kosher meat,
Right.
I have a small,
Little freezer or
a
fridge.
little freezer,
Yeah.
and my mom has her own fridge,
Right.
the whole fridge for her, and she has all her stuff. So there's no confusion about that.
That's good.
Okay, I'll keep it that way because that's the way I explained that to her.
Mhm.
And then I have in the regular fridge, I have a little section
Right.
in the fridge, which I put the dairy, like the cheeses,
Right.
my cheeses, not her
No
cheeses.
problem. Yeah.
So she knows. And then the bottom part, I have all the veggies and vegetables
Which.
divided, and the eggs there. So she knows.
Yeah, and
And
veggie and veg can mix, no problem.
No
right?
problem.
Her carrot, your tomatoes, it's okay.
Yes. So, but for her, she's, I just want to follow the way it is.
Right, of course.
So I told her that next year I'm gonna make my own little, kitchen in the backyard. Because the thing is, just recently I bought a huge umbrella, and it's really big and it covers. And I said, you know what? I'm just gonna get like a small, like a cabinet,
Right.
And I found I have that's what I was gonna ask you. Should I just, because I have in my house a stove,
Right.
like three
Electric,
things,
gas.
so electrical
Mhm.
ones. Electrical, that I can keep it on, and then
Right.
I just change the temperature.
No problem. Yeah.
No problem with that. And then I have, but these are brand new. She never used it.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I just cover them up,
Mhm.
nicely. And then I have a crock pot, brand new crock
Right.
pot.
Crock pots are always good.
It's good for me. Yeah, at least for myself, that is just for 8 days, it's okay.
Yep.
And then
You can put it on the first day, eat it the last day.
yes, yeah, so I'm okay with that. And then I have a tea kettle
Right.
that I
Mhm.
can make tea or coffee with
Yep.
that. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make a meat because I don't eat. If I eat cheese, well, I'll do it in the.
You don't need, and you don't need to cook it.
Uh-huh.
Right.
So I just do very, as you were saying, make
Mhm.
it simple, So that's what I'm gonna do next year.
That sounds reasonable, but because of the special circumstances you're in, right?
Uh-huh.
There are, unfortunately, in my opinion, some
Uh-huh.
people who they think that they are pleasing God by being stricter than they need to be,
Uh-huh.
and who go a little far in
Uh-huh.
trying to do that, and then make other people think that they're supposed to do that too.
Yes.
So
Well,
it's
it's true.
and so there are people who have like 3 kitchens. They have one
Wow.
kitchen that they use for meat, one kitchen they use for dairy,
Yes.
and one kitchen they only use for Passover. And A, it's not necessary.
Mhm.
B, it is ostentatious. It is kind of like showing off, look how religious I am.
Uh-huh.
And C, it is a waste of money that could be used for better purposes, right?
Mhm.
Either to educate yourself better, or to help other people, or to do
Yes.
other mitzvot better. that's just
You're right.
thousands and thousands of dollars that they waste that is not necessary. And also it's misunderstanding what God has asked us to do, right? God never told us to have 3 kitchens. For the last 3,000 years,
think we
it would
need a
have been
class for that.
impossible.
We need only a class for that. Because believe me, I never took that course, that kosher training,
right.
never, because it was on a Sunday
Right,
and I was working.
of course.
So it will be nice if you can just, take one class or half a day.
So I've done two videos on keeping kosher. So if you go back through YouTube, you can find the two pathways on kosher.
Okay.
And that will give the straight up basics as the Torah and the Mishnah, Talmud, and Jewish law has said. Before the modern world got a little crazy. And then if you have questions after that, let me know.
I'm
because
gonna look over.
Yeah, look over those first, and then I can also, if you want more like written information, I can recommend some other books and things like that. But it shouldn't be crazy, right? Because
you're right what you're saying. I've been in houses that these people, they have one section is divided.
Right.
It's like in the middle is the island.
Right.
This is the meat section. This is the dairy section. In the same kitchen. They have their freezer, everything like that.
My mother-in-law.
Oh yeah.
And the thing is, in the 20th century and now the 21st, we're fortunate because many people are able to afford a house that has that. But there are many people who can't afford it, and just think, 400 years ago, nobody could afford that. I mean, nobody had 2 stoves. I mean, that would have been just, a stove was something that I gave to my son when I died because it was so expensive. It wasn't something I just went and, to Best Buy and bought 3 of them. There was a crazy idea. So kashrut always has to be able to be kept even by people that are poor. Right? You shouldn't think you need to be rich to keep kosher because God did not tell us to be rich. He told us to be righteous. He didn't tell us to be rich.
That's true.
And that means that Judaism has to be available to people, even if they don't have very much money. And when people try to act like the only right way to do it is by spending thousands and thousands of dollars, it's not only incorrect, but it makes a very negative impression for other people who are trying to also to keep kosher. Exactly. And then it discourages them, and then they say, "Oh, well, fine. I'm just going to go have a bacon cheeseburger." It's like, that's not what we want.
No, I know. But it's funny because I've been houses that everything is divided. Even their saints are divided. Everything. But the funny part is that if something is broken, like for example, appliances get broken.
Of course, yeah.
They buy a new one. Doesn't matter if it breaks again, they will buy a new one. But it's for the mixed section and one that is for them. It's something crazy how much money they spend.
Which, like I said, generally, I don't mind if someone wants to buy the new iPad every year, fine. But when it comes to religion, for the people who make a big show out of what they're spending, then it really does sometimes limit and hurt other people who can't spend that much. And it's almost like, the way some people will show off their newest iPad, other people will show off their new talit or show off their new kosher this or their new Shabbat that. And it's really like a competition to show how fancy I can, and that's not what Judaism is meant to be, right? Where we're not supposed to show off look at how amazingly Jewish I am.
And how we keep it so kosher, Because it's true what you're saying. Some people, they just go to the extreme.
If they want to show off how much tzedakah they give. That would be a better thing to show.
Yes.
All right. Well, that was a great question. With that, we will finish for tonight.
Yes. Thank you.
Take care.
You too. I'll see you Saturday. Okay.